necessarily looking to take on new responsibility. Whenever the state identifies a list of individuals, there is a significant process that should be gone through to make sure those people are experts, credible. It's not really licensing, it's kind of, but the general public has a hard time distinguishing between people who are licensed and people who may be on a state list. So I am going to throw the ball to Julie now, because maybe all we do is recommend to the commission, and then, because you don't have to respond now, if we recommend that, then the commission can decide whether they're willing to do this.
Yeah, John, I like your proposal to, if the group decides we want to do this, to just put it forward and see what the commission has to say. The commission, we realize we only have the authority that is given to us through legislation, and right now we don't have legislative authority to do these kinds of things. But we do an annual report every year to the legislature, and it's possible that could be a recommendation that would be made in the next round of reporting. And I do know, and John is completely correct, that when people call us and want recommendations on, say, legal representation or other things, we can't say anything, because we can't, it's just not right for us to recommend services like that.
So is there an alternative group besides the public? Is that something your organization could do, John? Is there an alternative group that could come up with, we talked about, a list of independent investigators who have the expertise to look at this?
Well, it's possible the Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association could do that. I think part of what would happen, though, just to be candid about it, is the Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association is the statewide renewable energy group. And while they'd have the expertise to do that, I don't know if everybody that's out there would consider them kind of completely impartial and objective. So certainly, I mean, I'd have to go back to Jennifer actually and talk to their board, but I think it might be problematic if that group did that function. Maybe a university could do it, but again, we get back to resource issues.
Well, our earlier language had mentioned words like bidding and estimates and arbitrating, negotiating. The Public Service Commission was part and parcel of that process. And I think Julie's point earlier was that we really don't think the commission can get that much into detail about a specific complaint.
Maybe you go back to, again, these are local zoning ordinances. So in those zoning process, they have litigation, they have arbitration, they have processes for settling legal disputes at the community level already. So whether or not their process of litigation incorporates experts or how they do that, that's really their decision. I think we had talked about how can we enhance their ability to grapple with these issues so that the most objective process possible, so get most people involved and do it. And the community dispute resolution was the only way to do that where both parties had to agree on what an expert is. Because as soon as you move to arbitration and litigation, you have two parties, both of whom have their experts, both of whom are drawing on a common body of research and drawing different conclusions. Whereas in community dispute resolution, both parties are brought together and come to a common win-win, or they don't move forward. And so it was how do we help these communities? Because again, right now, it is their choice when they do a wind ordinance whether or not they put in dispute resolution process or not, or they just leave it open to the court.
So what about the issue of just simply making the argument one of keeping the state out of it?
The state is out of it, that's my point.
And if the state's going to be out of it, I don't see how we can go back to what we said before, because we were very much involved in it.
But so, Mark,
the state isn't involved.
So, Mark, do you have any suggestion of who could, develop this list of independent investigators? Is this something the mediators could come up with?
In a community mediation process, the question would be asked of the parties, I would assume in this instance, And John is a certified mediator, so he can actually add input on how this process works. But the parties decide whether or not they need to bring in outside experts or information, or is information what is lacking in the decision-making process. So they decide at that point, and nothing that comes out of the community dispute resolution process is binding unless both parties agree that it is. So it is a process that was set up, legal legislation authorized and allowed mediation to come in place almost 20 years ago, right?
So are communities now using this process?
Many communities use this process for things like child welfare, for divorce counseling, for the community mediation is set up for community disputes. But there are these community dispute centers around the state. People go take the training, and they are paid for by the people who are in the dispute, so they're not imposed. They don't represent the state. They don't represent either party. They are a mediator that helps the two parties come to a resolution. It is the step that happens before arbitration and before litigation.
Considering.
Oh, one thing that just thinking about Ken's question, one group that might be willing to do this, Michigan Society of Professional Engineers, at least with respect to engineering issues.
Sure.
I could imagine how them as a professional society might be willing to do that, but
I think the Michigan Bar Association would also have people on their list that are considered experts in different areas.
But the engineers would only cover.
Sure.
Right.
We're assuming
Well,
that most of these disputes are going to be over noise, I think.
Yeah.
Engineers might not deal with physical safety issues, and they might not deal with short flicker, although they might, I suppose.
I think it would depend on the dispute. So a local community is in the process of crafting a zoning law, or they have zoning law in place, and there seems to be a dispute. And there's a question of how they settle that dispute. Do they want to bring in experts, and who are those experts they're going to bring in to get to the facts?
Could you provide the recommended changes as you first discussed earlier?
Yes.
Later after the meeting?
Sure. I mean, it's
Also,
basically, right.
could you provide a list of, like John mentioned, the Michigan Society of Professional Engineers, the Bar Association, the Michigan Bar Association, I suppose, that we could at least mention in our document as being alternative groups?
You know, I think I would leave that to the community dispute person. That's their choice. So, I don't want to be prescriptive in here and say this is how the community dispute resolution process should happen. The way that it happens is they sit down with the two parties, they listen to the two parties, they find out what the issues are, they clarify the issues so both parties understand the issues, and then they mediate between the two partners to try to come to a mutually beneficial resolution. And if that includes, we should go out and get some experts, the mediator would say, okay, what kind of expert do we need? Where do you think we should get those experts? How do we define what an expert is? And that would be the process.
Ken, could I suggest we see what changes will be made?
No, that doesn't address what I'm talking about, Jerry. I would like to keep in what you've crossed out, and I understand, we're talking about the municipality and not the state, and so I would eliminate the Michigan Public Service Commission from that, and I would substitute municipality, and I think that those two paragraphs fly.
I'd like to hear response to that from John and Mark. Because I don't want to put it in if you guys are going to later.
Yeah, I think that's okay, because what you're saying is that the local jurisdiction would appoint an independent investigator.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Sounds good to me.
So could we say we also recommend? Just leave it
Well,
as it is?
we also recommend an alternative, an addition, they're all possibilities.
Right, they're all possible.
Okay, I'll add that kind of language to what Mark provides as an update.
Yeah, and again, I only dealt with the community dispute resolution component of this, so
Okay.
just suggesting that we add that to the recommendations on community dispute, on resolving disputes.
we move up the agenda now, we started at the bottom of our three first issues. Let's talk about shadow clerk. If we're
I have a comment.
consolidating.
So-
Yeah, comment on conflict resolution?
Yeah, so you want everything put back in that was crossed out? I don't agree with the last sentence that makes it a wind company obligated to pay the arbitrator. The fee stated in the estimate.
Or in this case, the investigator, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That,
Well, I
Doesn't
thought we
make
were
sense.
taking the commission out of it. Commission wouldn't stay in because we've already taken the commission out of it in terms of resolution.
It's actually,
no, but see, the MPSC, it says here the MPSC would be consulted, at which point it would appoint an independent investigator with expertise in the
yeah,
matter.
but we've changed that to the
But even
municipal.
so you replace that,
And the word arbitrator should be replaced with investigator in that last sentence. And because it's really the investigator would submit an estimate of the work to be performed to both the municipality and the wind company.
if the wind company would be obligated to pay the
investigator.
investigator the fee stated in the
Right.
estimate.
Yeah, I don't agree.
Well, who's gonna pay the investigator?
Well, that's why a mediator, I like this, both parties pay. If both parties agree that they need an arbitrator, or need a mediator, then they both agree to pay.
I know Huron County is, getting certain fees from the wind developer, so they've created a fund that is being used to pay for any studies that need to be done. So even though, kind of indirectly, the developer is paying for the investigations, at least in that one county. But that's not what you're suggesting, the language now is.
Well, the
basically,
language is that,
Same
that's
bill.
one alternative.
Right.
We're talking about writing draft language that a municipality could potentially adopt. And so one is the wind company pays, one is paid out of fees, one is jointly paid. And since we don't.
We can put in here the range of options
Right,
using.
we have the
communities.
luxury of not making the final decision, because it's a municipality zoning or whatever, and so, but these are the options.
So I'm just worried that, let's say there's, this doesn't specify any limit to complaints in the resolution process. Let's say there's complaints that go on forever. So that, and the cost of the wind developer could be infinite. There's no limits, so it just worries me.
What about including language to the effect that who pays is resolvable through the mediation process? That is an option that mediation can decide who pays. If the local community is going to have to decide.
Oh, yeah,
that's an option.
that's why I like the mediation process more.
Yeah.
It's just that one sentence in there.